Hi, my name is Jerry Anderson, and welcome to this Introduction to BizTalk Server 2010. Kent Ware and I will be presenting this series of screencasts that focus on the aspects of BizTalk Server 2010 that will be of primary interest to IT professionals who will be working with BizTalk Server in an administrative role. So it includes topics such as installation, configuration, and maintenance of a BizTalk environment. If you will be working with BizTalk Server 2010 in a development role, then you will probably find that the selection of topics presented in the course titled Developing Business Process and Integration Solutions using BizTalk Server 2010 will be a better fit than the series of topics presented in this course. If you haven't already worked with BizTalk Server, I think you'll find that it covers a lot of territory. And it ultimately needs to, because integrating systems can be a rather complex undertaking, and BizTalk Server 2010 is designed to handle a broad range of integration scenarios. So this course then is intended to encapsulate the core knowledge that you'll need to perform the basic administration tasks, as well as to provide the background that you'll need to take advantage of the BizTalk Server documentation, as well as all of the other resources that are available when the time comes to perform the more complex tasks. The content of this first module assumes no prior knowledge of BizTalk Server. So if you're seeing it for the first time, we'll be starting off covering the basics, gaining an understanding of what BizTalk provides, and how it can help us integrate systems. If you have seen BizTalk before, then the second part of this module will most likely be of primary interest to you, and that provides a summary of the new features in BizTalk Server 2010. And then finally, in the last part of this module, we'll take a high-level look at the tools that are available to developers, business analysts, and BizTalk administrators. And then in the upcoming modules, you'll have a chance to gain some experience with the BizTalk administration tools. BizTalk Server offers so many services and features and tools that it's easy to get lost when you're seeing it for the first time. So we'll start off by talking about some of the basic questions that you might have about BizTalk, such as what is it? And what is it good for? What kind of problems can it solve? And where does it fit within my enterprise? We'll talk about some of the common complaints that people might have when they're dealing with integration projects. We'll look at the ways in which BizTalk can help you when you need to integrate systems within your enterprise, as well as when you need to connect with systems outside of your enterprise. And after that, we'll take a look beneath the surface to see how the components of BizTalk work together to help us integrate systems. And then I'll talk about how BizTalk addresses the needs of different job roles. So information workers, developers, and administrators all have specific needs. And so I'll talk about the features and tools that BizTalk offers to meet the needs of each of those roles. And then finally, there are 4 different editions of BizTalk Server 2010 that are available, so I'll describe what each of those editions provides. Okay, the first question to answer is, what is BizTalk? And if someone were to ask you that, you could say that it is an integration server. But then you would probably have to immediately answer the question, what is an integration server? Well, at a conceptual level, an integration server provides the services and tools that can be used to communicate and coordinate data transfers between applications and systems. And those applications might be running within a single enterprise. But in general, an integration server is designed under the assumption that it will be used to integrate systems and applications, both within the boundaries of a single enterprise as well as across enterprise boundaries. So that leaves the question, what kinds of services and tools does BizTalk provide? Well, at its core, BizTalk provides a messaging engine and an orchestration engine. A message is simply a set of data that is communicated from one application to another. So the messaging engine then consists of a set of components that you can use to facilitate communication between systems. If the systems that you're integrating simply need to pass a few messages back and forth, then the messaging engine very well could provide everything that you need. On the other hand, if you're working with more complex integration scenarios, you might think about using BizTalk's orchestration engine to coordinate the message traffic between systems. Now, as you implement integrations with BizTalk, you will typically need to create some custom components to meet the requirements of each system involved in the integration. You might, for example, need to alter the format of a message as it passes from one system to another through BizTalk. And BizTalk provides a set of development tools that integrate with Visual Studio, and they simplify the process of creating those custom components. Now, as you create components for your integration solutions, you'll quite likely find that you need to incorporate some form of decision-making or conditional logic. And rather than embed that logic by hard-coding it within your custom components, you might want to take advantage of BizTalk's business rules framework to store your application logic within a central repository, making it easier to update those rules as business conditions and requirements change over time. Now, as BizTalk is handling this communication between systems, it is automatically going to collect and record tracking data for each message that it processes. And it provides convenient access to that tracking data, which includes access to both historical data and live data. Now, BizTalk was designed with very few assumptions about the systems with which it would be communicating. But since it only makes sense to take advantage of web service interfaces when they're available, BizTalk makes use of the Windows Communication Foundation to provide very rich support for web services, both for publishing them as well as consuming them. Now, BizTalk's default message tracking capability is really intended to meet the needs of BizTalk developers and administrators. BizTalk does provide a means of collecting data at a higher level that would be of interest to business users, and that feature is known as Business Activity Monitoring. If you enable Business Activity Monitoring, BizTalk can produce that data in the form of OLAP cubes that business users can make use of to perform business-level analysis of data that is passing back and forth between systems. And finally, when integrating with systems across enterprise boundaries, it's crucial to have an efficient means of managing all of the communication parameters that are required for each of those integrations. So BizTalk provides a trading partner management system to meet that need. So yes, it's possible to integrate systems with custom code, but I think it's safe to say that over time, you'll find yourself creating a set of components and services that look remarkably similar to the ones that you see listed here. Now, the services and tools that BizTalk provides are intended to address the common complaints that IT managers, developers, and administrators have when they are trying to integrate their applications. And it can be a real challenge to integrate applications that do not share a common data format or a common communication protocol. But that's exactly what the features of BizTalk's messaging engine and orchestration engine address. Part of the difficulty of integrating applications is that it often requires developers and administrators to have detailed knowledge of each of the applications that is involved. And that might include knowledge of different database systems, different operating systems, different communication protocols, different programming languages, and APIs. And while BizTalk might not be able to shield you from all of those details, it does give you a consistent toolset and a framework for developing and hosting the components that are required to integrate a set of applications. And that will give you a better chance of accurately predicting how long an integration project might take. And related to that is the fact that a common set of tools and components simplifies deployment tasks as well. Now, once the integration is up and running, we might find that the systems involved are providing reports of data that conflict with one another. But if we make use of BizTalk's business activity monitoring features, we could instruct BizTalk to keep track of the data that is being updated between systems, and allow that data to serve as the basis for a consistent set of reports. Now, if developing integrations in the first place is difficult, making modification is only more so, because now a developer or administrator needs to not only understand the various applications involved, but also the integration components that have been developed. And if the components are scattered across multiple platforms and the original developer is no longer available, that can turn into a real headache. But that's where BizTalk's consistent set of components and development tools can make it easier to understand how an integration works. And in that same vein, since each integration can make use of similar types of components, it will be easier to develop a consistent set of procedures to manage each of those integrations, If each integration makes use of its own tracking or logging mechanism, it might be hard to determine what is transpiring as data is passing back and forth between applications. But we've seen that BizTalk offers a built-in message tracking capability, and it offers the higher level tracking capabilities of business activity monitoring. And then as the number of B2B integrations grows, we need to be able to manage the details that are required to communicate with each of those business partners. And we need to be able to easily add new business partners. And that's where we can make use of BizTalk's trading partner management features. Alright, well let's step through an integration scenario that illustrates how these pieces fit together. In this example, we need to integrate an inventory application with an ERP system, as well as a fulfillment application. When the inventory system determines that the stock of some particular item is running low, it needs to notify the ERP system that it should place an order, and then the ERP system needs to send that order to the fulfillment application. Now, for the sake of discussion, we're going to say that the inventory system runs on a mainframe, and the ERP system is hosted in a Unix environment, and the fulfillment application runs on Windows, and it makes use of the .NET framework. So fortunately, BizTalk can help us deal with the disparities amongst these applications. We can make use of its messaging engine, for example, to handle the communication with the various systems. And we might think about using the orchestration engine to help manage and control the flow of messages between the systems. But by making use of the built-in components, and then by taking advantage of the BizTalk development tools to create any custom components that are required, we're well ahead of where we would be if we were going to implement all of this functionality in custom code. Now, the ultimate goal is to consolidate all of our integration development into a set of BizTalk components. And if at all possible, avoid making any changes to the systems and applications that are being integrated. And to the degree that we can accomplish that, it will simplify the deployment and migration tasks that are required to get this integration up and running. Now this picture indicates that the inventory application would not know when an order has been sent to the fulfillment application. And the ERP system wouldn't be aware of how that purchase order was actually delivered to the fulfillment application, nor how the fulfillment application responded. Now, since BizTalk is sitting in the center coordinating all of this activity, it knows more about any of the systems, about what is actually going on. So we could use business activity monitoring and instruct BizTalk to collect the bits of data that are significant for this process. And then we can rely on BizTalk to produce a set of accurate reports. Now, if we've been able to consolidate most or all of the integration code into BizTalk components, it's going to be much easier to handle modifications down the road. And assuming that this is just one of many integrations that is being implemented in BizTalk for our enterprise, then the procedures that are required to manage this integration should be very similar to the procedures that are required to manage any other integration. And without having to do anything else, we automatically receive the benefit of BizTalk's message tracking capabilities. And if we eventually extend this scenario to start interacting with trading partners, we'll want to think about using BizTalk's trading partner management features. Now, if we stick to simple integration scenarios, we might just rely on BizTalk's capabilities to communicate over various communication protocols and reformat data as needed to communicate with each system. But in those scenarios, we're hardly taking full advantage of what BizTalk has to offer. And so it's a good idea to eventually start thinking in terms of business process automation. And in those types of scenarios, our goal is to minimize the amount of human intervention that is required to carry out a business process. But of course, that will probably require more complex interactions with each of the systems, and it will probably require BizTalk to perform some sort of decision making. And that's where we can really benefit from BizTalk's orchestration engine as well as its business rules engine. We can use BizTalk's orchestration engine to implement an automated business process, and when we deploy those orchestration components, they will coordinate the activity of the messaging engine to ensure that the right data is delivered to the right system in the right format and at the right time. And along with that, we might deploy a set of business rules that the orchestration can use to guide the flow of the business process in accordance with a set of standard business policies. Alright, now that we have a sense of what BizTalk is doing, let's take a look beneath the surface and understand how it goes about doing its job. At a high level, we could say that BizTalk is going to accept some data from an application in the form of a message. That message will be delivered to a set of components that represent an automated business process. Those business process components will operate on the data in that message and potentially produce a new message that is sent on to a destination, whether that is a system within our own enterprise or to a business partner's application. And that cycle of receiving and sending messages continues until the business process is complete. Now, of course, there is a lot that needs to happen to carry all of this out. So let's step through the sequence of components that make all of this possible. Any message being sent into BizTalk will be processed by a collection of components known as a receive port. There is a component called a receive adapter that is responsible for all of the communication that is required to read a message into BizTalk. So there are many implementations of receive adapters, each of which knows how to communicate via a standard network protocol, or it knows how to communicate with some given application by making calls to its APIs. So, however it goes about it, the receive adapter is going to read in the body of a message, and it is going to construct the internal objects that BizTalk requires to process that message. Now, as the adapter is reading in the contents of a message, it is going to pass those bytes to a set of components known as a receive pipeline. And the receive pipeline components are responsible for performing any sort of pre-processing that is required. It might be necessary, for example, to decrypt the stream of bytes that's being read in by the receive adapter. Now, we're going to assume here that the receive pipeline is ultimately going to produce an XML message. But that's not absolutely necessary, by the way. BizTalk is certainly able to receive and send binary data. Okay, once the pipeline has produced an XML message, we may want to convert that message to a format that meets the requirements for our automated business process. And we could rely on a component known as a BizTalk map to handle that conversion. This scenario assumes that we have received a message from our trading partner named Contoso, and they had sent a flat file, and our receive pipeline has converted that into an XML equivalent of that flat file. It also assumes that we have provided a map that implements the rules that are required to convert the message from Contoso's format to the format that we use at Fabricam that is expected by our automated business process. Once that conversion is complete, that message is going to be stored in a database which is referred to as the BizTalk message box. Any message that passes through BizTalk will be stored in the message box database, and BizTalk will not only store the content of that message, it will also store metadata that describes that message. And it's that metadata that serves as the basis for BizTalk's message tracking capability. Now, so far, everything that we have talked about has been governed by BizTalk's messaging engine. At this point, the messaging engine is going to deliver a copy of this message to the orchestration engine, and the orchestration engine will initialize the components that represent the automated business process that know how to handle this message from Contoso. Now, this scenario assumes that the business process components are going to operate on this message and produce a new message which is sent to the message box. And that message is destined for another trading partner. Any message that is sent out of BizTalk will pass through a collection of components that is called a send port. And as the message passes through, it is going to be converted from our internal Fabricam format to an XML document that represents the flat file format of our trading partner named Northwind Traders. And it's the responsibility of the send pipeline to convert that XML data into the actual flat file that Northwind Traders expects to receive. And those bytes will be passed to a send adapter component that is responsible for handling the communication with the destination system at Northwind Traders. Now, apart from the message box, any of the components that you see listed here can be configured or even replaced with a custom component to meet the requirements of any given integration. Now, when thinking about implementing and managing a BizTalk integration solution, it might not be entirely clear how the project responsibilities should be assigned. So, this slide offers a set of guidelines that might help you determine who is responsible for a given task. Now, the responsibilities of an information worker or business analyst would most likely include the design or the specification of any business processes that are to be automated, and along with that, specification of any business rules that are required for that automation. And those specifications might very well take on the form of Excel spreadsheets, Word documents, or Visio diagrams. An information worker might also be expected to produce the definitions that are required to implement business activity monitoring. And they might use the Excel add-in that is provided by BizTalk for that purpose. And after the solution has been implemented and deployed, it could potentially be the information worker's responsibility to maintain and update the business rules using the tools that BizTalk provides for that purpose. And of course, an information worker could be expected to perform any analysis that is required on the data that is collected by the business activity monitoring components. And an information worker might also be expected, at least in part, to manage and maintain the details that pertain to communication with different trading partners. A developer then can be expected to take these specifications from an information worker and make use of the BizTalk development tools in Visual Studio to create the components that are required to automate the business process. And of course, a developer will need access to a BizTalk environment for unit testing, and so that might be an installation of BizTalk on their own development machine, or they might perform their development and testing in their own copy of a virtual machine. It's also quite likely that the responsibility of creating an initial implementation of a set of business rules will fall to the developer. After that, it depends on the personnel involved whether or not it makes sense to hand that responsibility off to an information worker for maintenance and modifications. Then, once a developer has completed unit testing and the integration components are ready for the next phase, the developer then can take all of those components and the corresponding configuration settings and package those up and deliver them to an administrator. And then the administrator can import those components into a new testing environment. And of course, administrators will be handling the installation and configuration of new BizTalk environments, as well as the configuration of new hardware when scaling out existing BizTalk environments. A BizTalk administrator is also going to need to think about database administration, since BizTalk relies on SQL Server to store all of the messages that it processes, and they will quite likely also be responsible for implementing security measures to protect the network connections that BizTalk will be using to communicate with other systems. The BizTalk Server 2010 comes in 4 different editions. Well, which one's the right one? I'm going to go through this list from the bottom up. So the first one to talk about is the Developer Edition. So the keyword here is free. This is available as a download from the Microsoft website, and you can use it for development and testing purposes, and it contains all of the features of the Enterprise Edition. And I'll say more about the Enterprise Edition in just a minute. Next is the Branch Edition. So this is what you would need if you had a remote location or a branch office that needed to communicate information back to your main BizTalk group. It includes all the network protocol adapters, the HTTP and FTP adapter, for example. And it will make use of up to 2 processors. But you'll need to group all of your components into a single BizTalk application. And that might make certain system administration tasks a little bit tedious. The next step is the Standard Edition. This includes not only all of the network protocol adapters, but it also includes the application adapters. In other words, the adapters that know how to communicate with a particular type of system, maybe an ERP system or database system. This one offers more flexibility when grouping your components together. You can group them in up to 5 different applications, and that will make deployment tasks easier. It will make it easier when a system administrator needs to disable a certain integration. They can just stop or start an entire application and treat the components as a whole, rather than having to go in and pick and choose individual components that need to be enabled and disabled. And like the branch edition, it will take advantage of up to 2 processors. And if that meets the needs of your integration environment, that's probably the way to go. As you might expect, the Enterprise Edition offers the broadest capability. Like the Standard Edition, this includes all of the application adapters and all of the technology adapters. There is no limit on the number of applications, so you can group your integration components however you please, whatever makes it easiest to manage those integrations. And finally, you can scale it up to more powerful hardware than you could with the Standard and Branch editions. So, now that you have a sense of what BizTalk Server is and what it has to offer, let's take a couple of minutes to focus on BizTalk Server 2010 and the improvements that it offers over previous versions of BizTalk. Some of the improvements are related to installation and setup features, support for sysprep, for example, and clustering. BizTalk Server 2010 offers some improvements in the developer tools, such as the new mapper. There have been improvements in the BizTalk Administration Console, which helps system administrators manage configuration settings and perform database tasks. The BizTalk Administration Console also provides a new user interface for the new Trading Partner Management System. And then there have been improvements in the FTP adapter, in particular the security features that it offers. And the application adapters have been updated to support the latest versions of the applications. And I'll close by covering a few points that you need to be aware of if you're planning to upgrade an existing BizTalk Server installation to BizTalk Server 2010. From BizTalk 2004 through 2006 R2, it was notoriously difficult to create an image of a BizTalk installation and replicate that on other machines. And that becomes really important if you want to start using a virtualization environment such as Hyper-V. And the reason that it's so difficult is that after BizTalk is installed and configured, it stashes away a copy of the machine name in a number of different locations. And most people treated it as an impossible task to be able to find all of those references and update them. Now, quite honestly, BizTalk 2009 included a set of scripts in the SDK under the admin folder that provided the instructions that were required to update a BizTalk installation after sysprep had been run. It's just making the headlines now in BizTalk Server 2010 as an officially supported feature. I mentioned earlier that BizTalk Server 2010 supports clustering. Now, talking about clustering, you've actually been able to use Windows clustering in BizTalk Server installations in the past. So the fact that you can install BizTalk Server on a Windows cluster is not new news. The big news here is that you can now take advantage of the new features available in Windows Server 2008 R2 clustering. The clustering support that Windows 2008 R2 offers really is pretty amazing. It supports multi-site clustering, so you now can have servers at different geographic locations all participating in the same cluster. So not only does that help you achieve high availability, but you're also getting automatic disaster recovery. So you're no longer bound by the network restrictions that you had to work with in previous versions of Windows clustering. And by moving to 2008 R2, you can take advantage of a number of other improvements in Windows clustering. But in order to do that, you'll need to be installing BizTalk Server 2010. BizTalk Server 2010 includes some improvements in the developer tools as well. In particular, there have been some really significant improvements in the mapper. If you've worked with maps to any extent in the past, you'll really appreciate what the new version of the mapper has to offer. The previous implementation of the mapper supported cut, copy, paste, and so forth, as well as search, to some extent. But those functions have been improved significantly in the newest version. And the new mapper makes it a lot easier to navigate your maps and focus on what you need to see. BizTalk Server 2010 supports a scenario in which you can use certain BizTalk components outside of the BizTalk runtime environment. If you are using Windows App Fabric hosting services to host a WCF and workflow application, you can make use of the BizTalk mapper and the BizTalk line of business adapters within your application. If you've never heard of Windows App Fabric is a set of extensions that you can add to your server if you've configured your server to run under the application server role. In short, App Fabric hosting services extend the capabilities that are already offered by IIS and the Windows Process Activation Service. So IIS continues to provide the process that hosts your application, and then App Fabric hosting services provides some additional management features that make it easier to work with your app. App Fabric actually provides a dashboard that you can use to manage your app, and it allows you to do things like view the runtime status of your WCF services. You can use the dashboard to stop and start a WCF service, or to manage the configuration settings for that service, suspend a workflow, or resume a workflow, or even terminate a workflow. And you can even use the dashboard to view historical data. So that probably sounds like there's some overlap between BizTalk and App Fabric. And there is to some degree. So you might say that Windows App Fabric provides a subset of the features of BizTalk. And then BizTalk Server 2010 allows you to share its mapper and line of business adapters with the App Fabric runtime environment. And so finally, one of the other improvements that's sort of inherent here is that BizTalk Server 2010 is built on the .NET 4.0 framework. And so if you need to write any custom components, you can take advantage of the latest version of the framework. Now when we start talking about the deployment and management improvements in BizTalk Server 2010, one of the first things worth mentioning is the new BizTalk Server settings dashboard. In the past, if you needed to modify a configuration setting to improve the performance of your BizTalk environment, you would need to look in any of a number of different locations. You might have to look in the registry, or depending on the setting, it might be in the BizTalk service configuration file, or it might be in the management database, in which case you should be able to find it in the BizTalk administration console. Needless to say, it could be kind of time-consuming trying to locate that information so that you can make the change. Well, in BizTalk Server 2010, all of that configuration information is now presented to you through the BizTalk Server settings dashboard. So you can go into the BizTalk Server administration console and you'll find a page that presents these settings to you in one convenient spot. And once you have the configuration nailed down, you can export those settings to a file, take that file to another server, and import them there. So that makes it a lot easier to maintain consistency across your servers. Some of the other improvements that you can take advantage of in BizTalk Server 2010 actually originate in the latest version of SQL Server. So SQL Server 2008 supports compressed backups. So as you're backing up your BizTalk databases, you can take advantage of that compression. And it also supports encryption, so you can take advantage of that as well. BizTalk Server 2010 does include a new SQL agent job that will scan and monitor all of the BizTalk databases, looking for evidence of common issues, and it will report those to you if it discovers anything. BizTalk Server 2010 also includes a new System Center Operations Management pack, and so this makes it a lot easier to view the status of your BizTalk environment. It will display a color-coded status icon for every component with your application, which makes it easy to see if everything is running normally or if there are any problems cropping up. If there is a problem, it will report the error information to you. It also offers some performance improvements over previous management packs in the way that it searches a BizTalk environment, discovering artifacts and how they're related to one another. Another new significant improvement in BizTalk Server 2010 is that the trading partner management system has been re-implemented from the ground up. The new implementation of the trading partner management system is much more scalable. It's designed to maintain information for a much larger number of trading partners. and it provides a model that's easier to work with when you're thinking about trading partner relationships. So BizTalk Server 2010 no longer makes use of the previous object model. So if you are going to migrate data from a previous version to the current version, you can take advantage of a migration tool that BizTalk Server 2010 offers. One other item worth mentioning is people who are going to be managing this trading partner information quite likely will be business analysts. So BizTalk Server 2010 defines a new role known as the B2B operator role. And if you add someone's user ID to that B2B operator role, they will have access to the trading partner information through the BizTalk administration console, and they won't be able to make changes to any other part of the BizTalk environment. Looking at BizTalk Server 2010 from the perspective of adapter improvements, the FTP adapter now supports secure connections over SSL or TLS. In the past, you had to either use a VPN connection or acquire a third-party adapter to handle secure FTP. It now comes in the box. Another item that frequently came up when people would work with the previous versions of the FTP adapter is that you really couldn't use it when you needed to download files from read-only locations. The previous version of the FTP adapter needed to be able to delete a file after it had read it so that it wouldn't download it multiple times. The new FTP adapter also adds support for atomic transfers in ASCII mode. In previous versions, the FTP adapter only supported atomic transfers in binary mode. And then BizTalk Server also provides a set of updated line of business adapters. If you're going to upgrade an installation of a previous version of BizTalk Server to version 2010, BizTalk Server 2010 Setup will automatically scan for previous versions of BizTalk and determine which upgrade it needs to apply. It can support upgrades directly from versions 2006 R2 and 2009. But if you're upgrading a 2004 or 2006 installation, you will first need to upgrade to 2006 R2. Then in your development environment, when you open your existing projects in Visual Studio 2010 for the first time, Visual Studio 2010 will automatically convert that to the new project format. And once that's complete, you can continue working with your application in the new environment. I mentioned earlier that BizTalk provides a set of tools to meet the individual needs of developers, business analysts, and BizTalk administrators. So let's take a minute to talk about the various tool sets that are available. And then throughout the remainder of the course, we will be focusing on the administration tools. BizTalk provides a set of 4 tools for developers, and they are integrated into Visual Studio, which gives developers access to all of the built-in capabilities of Visual Studio, along with these BizTalk extensions. Developers will also need to make use of some of the administration tools to manage their BizTalk applications within their own development environment while they perform unit testing, but most of their time will be spent working with the tools that you see listed here. One thing that is not included in this list, by the way, is a unit testing framework. And the BizTalk product itself does not provide such a framework, but there is one available on Microsoft's CodePlex website, and that is called the BizUnit framework, and that can be used to test any of the components that a developer might create. Developers can use the BizTalk editor to create schemas to define the format of messages that a BizTalk application will be processing. They can use this tool to create both XML schemas as well as schemas for flat files. It turns out that both of those types of schemas ultimately are XML schemas, and the flat file schemas contain additional XML annotations that describe how to parse a flat file and convert it into XML. The BizTalk mapper can be used to define the mapping rules for transforming a message from one format to another. So, when creating a map, a developer provides an input schema and an output schema, and then the mapper makes it easy to specify how values from the input document should be converted and copied over to the output document. The mapper then takes those rules and creates an XSLT transform that BizTalk can use to perform the conversion at runtime. BizTalk provides a set of built-in pipelines for pre-processing and post-processing messages as they pass through receive and send ports. But if those built-in pipelines don't meet the needs of a given application, then a developer can make use of the pipeline designer to specify exactly which components should be used to process a message. Developers can also configure the individual pipeline components, but those pipeline components can actually be overridden after deployment by using the administration tools. The orchestration designer is the most powerful of these tools, and it's the tool that a developer would use to lay out the flow of an automated business process. And then BizTalk can make use of that orchestration to control the message traffic at runtime to carry out that business process. So each of these tools provides a graphical designer with the intention of making it easier for a general audience to understand the meaning and the functionality of each of the components. One other thing to be aware of is that each of these tools will actually generate a C# class that represents their respective components. And those C# classes will be compiled and included in an assembly. In some cases, the C# class definition is very simple. The schema editor, for example, simply provides a class that has a property on it that returns a string containing the XML schema document. The orchestration designer, on the other hand, generates a class definition that contains some fairly complex code that interacts with the orchestration engine to carry out the business process. So the main thought there is that a developer will use these tools to create one or more assemblies, and those assemblies will ultimately need to be installed in the global assembly cache. And we'll talk more about the process of deploying a BizTalk application in Module 3. And even with all of the capability provided by these tools, developers may still find it necessary to create additional class library assemblies that contain helper classes that can be used by these BizTalk components. And then finally, you'll see the term artifact used from time to time in the BizTalk documentation, and that simply refers to the components that are created by these BizTalk development tools. The tools that will be of interest to business analysts are the XL add-in for creating BAM definitions, and they will also use the BAM portal to view and analyze the business activity data after it has been collected. And if any of the BizTalk applications in your environment make use of the trading partner management system, then the business analyst will likely need access to the trading partner data to create and maintain trading partner profiles. And there's a good chance that administrators will need to be involved in those maintenance tasks as well. The user interface for the trading partner management system is actually embedded within the BizTalk administration console, but you can limit the access of a business analyst by assigning their user ID to the B2B operators group. The tools that BizTalk provides to meet the needs of administrators have improved with each release since BizTalk 2004. And the one that gets the most attention is the BizTalk Administration Console. And it provides a graphical user interface for viewing and editing configuration data stored in the BizTalk management database. It also provides access to the tracking data, whether that's live data stored in the BizTalk message box database, or historical data stored in the BizTalk tracking database. As you progress through this course, you'll have plenty of chances to use the BizTalk Administration Console to accomplish various tasks, such as deploying and undeploying BizTalk applications, as well as starting and stopping BizTalk applications, as well as starting or stopping various components within an application, and of course, querying for tracking data. There is also a command line equivalent of the administration console, and the command line tool is called BTS Task. And they both make use of the same BizTalk Explorer object model to implement their respective sets of features. Another tool that will be of interest to administrators, BizTalk Server 2010 also offers an updated management pack, and that requires an installation of Microsoft Systems Center Operations Manager, and that is covered in depth in Module 6 of this course. In this lab, you'll be running some tests on a sample application that implements a simple purchase order approval process for a fictional company named AdventureWorks. So you'll submit messages that represent purchase orders from two other fictional companies. One of them, named Contoso, has negotiated a discount on all orders that it submits to AdventureWorks, and that discount increases for orders over $10,000. The other partner, named Fabricam, receives a smaller discount for orders over $10,000, but they don't receive any discount on orders below that amount. Another condition within the process is that orders below $10,000 require manual approval. So those orders will be sent to a SharePoint document library, and an order will remain there until you update the status to approve or deny that order. If an order is approved, BizTalk will calculate its total and send a copy of that order to a folder in the file system to acknowledge that the order is being processed, and a shipping notice will be sent to an FTP site. If an order is denied, then a copy of that order will simply be sent to a folder in the file system that represents all denied orders. So even though the sample application makes use of the file system to record which orders have been approved and which have been denied, it's not too hard to imagine that the application could simply be using a different adapter to transmit those messages to some other system in the enterprise, or back to the customer who placed the order, or maybe even both.